There's certain things that we didn't start, but we gotta put it out when it comes to a fire. So we didn't start the fire, but we gotta put it out. But the people that did start it were Putin and Trump, and so we know exactly who got the world into this mess. And the challenge for the rest of us is what we're gonna do about it. Now, last week in southern Ukraine, um, Brian Kareem, if I'm saying the name right, had ran into a woman who had once lived in the United States, but she's living in Ukraine now. She basically said that life there that life here outside the United States had reminded her of a runaway hay wagon on fire rolling into a small village. But instead of fleeing or trying to put the flames out, the American people argue about who's at fault for this, who's at fault for starting the fire while the village burns. Now, a day later, we observe um, President Biden speaking in Poland. He made a comment about Putin that was nothing more than a heartfelt observation following a prolonged meeting with Ukrainian refugees. Now for fuck's sake, Putin cannot remain in power, he said. The world cheered, and Biden's overprotective staff um, also basically didn't give much say so. But they tried to walk back and clarify the statement less than an hour later of what Biden said. Now President Biden came forward the following day to clarify the clarification, standing by what he said in the first place and further expanding on it. Now, to me, it's like watching people beat the guy to death who said the villagers should get water and put out the fiery hay wagon. So basically people go home just in time. Uh, basically, basically people get home just in time to not watch the Oscars ceremony, and after what we dub the slap heard around the world made its way into the social media feed, I basically didn't give a shit because I didn't watch it either. We muttered that I just seen displaced people. They were maimed and injured Ukrainians and colleagues who had died trying to report on the war, and I really can give two shits about who slapped who or why. Basically, that made a few people angry, and I stand by my initial reaction. Arguing over a single stick on fire while the wagon burns seems fucking silly to me, but I will say this. We seem to have forgotten the old adage about the term sticks and stones, and my father's warning about starting fights. As a comedian, if you have to worry about getting slapped every time you made a joke that doesn't land, well, there are going to be a lot of bruised comics or a lot less comedy in America. And that, my fucking friends, is what the fiery wagon actually means for us. We've lost the ability to reason with people, along with their sense of humor. We're not arguing over who's at fault for the fiery wagon, but we're frozen in fear of it. Some of us aren't even sure the wagon's on fire, but no one will make a fucking joke about it. And that, by the way, is precisely the goal behind the steady stream of disinformation that we've been fed by Foe and Trump and the Repug politicians and the press for at least the last 20 years. And we are fearful, brittle, and unable to laugh, or even just frown at a bad joke, unable to argue about who's at fault for the fiery wagon, and some of us are just pouring gasoline on top of it and lighting the match. And those who are encouraging the fire are also stifling those who are trying to put it out, sometimes making us doubt the fire can or should be extinguished at all. Now, take this for example. A question that we've asked of Kate Bedingford, who's a White House Director of Communications. They briefed the press for the first time on Tuesday. She stepped up to the podium because Jen Psaki and her principal deputy, Karine Jeanine-Pierre, are both out of the office due to COVID, but they were both fine apparently, but staying home for now. But even Jen Psaki is going to leave anyway. Bedingford did well in her first outing, even laughing off a ridiculous question about a hypothetical bombing by Israeli forces that sounded as if it came from the mind of a 5-year-old. But she couldn't or wouldn't explain the administration's inability to assist Ukraine in providing air cover over its own skies. Now take for granted we have a no-fly zone that was administered by the U.S. military, and it would inevitably lead to a confrontation with Russia that few but Vladimir Putin seem to want. And there are other ways to assist, however, but Ukrainian authorities that we spoke with recently suggested a Lend-Lease Act, similar to the one enacted to aid European allies before the U.S. entered, and the last major ground war in Europe that would be World War II for those who wonder. So we've asked, has that been approached? Has the administration considered this? Now, Bedingford said, Well, I think that President Biden has been explicitly clear that he does not intend to engage U.S. troops in any way to direct conflict with the Russian military. But this wouldn't be troops. And Benningford says, I'm sorry. Basically, this wouldn't be troops where we're talking about the Lend Lease for the aircraft, and they would have to supply the pilots. Basically, Benningford's response was, I guess, a couple of things. One is the assessment of our military, and it's the fact that the anti-tank, the munitions that we're providing to the Ukrainians are the most effective things that they can have on the battlefield, and that's the assessment of our military commanders, and of course something that that President Biden factors significantly into this decision making. Now, the second thing is, and we would have to say this again, he has been very clear that he's not interested in engaging in the U.S. military and basically being in direct conflict with Russia. And there are, for example, on the question of the MiGs, there are significant logistical challenges that may rise against those issues. As to whether there's a specific discussion about Lend Lease, I don't have any further detail that can be provided on this, except to just lay out those two key points that have really been driving President Biden's thinking and decision making on this whole thing. And this would be a classic example of a non-answer, kind of like answering the question of whether or not the wagon was on fire by saying squirrel and pointing in the general direction of the nearest tree. Now, the amount of disinformation and misinformation about air superiority in Ukraine has been exacerbated by poor reporting, thus confusing the issue and perhaps the administration's response. Now, maybe the White House doesn't want to tell the truth for fear that we'll misunderstand the answer, but it's hard to believe that Biden is unaware of what a Lend Lease is, though perhaps Bedingfield is. Still, the larger question remains about the need for Ukrainian air support. Now, our military assessment of what Ukraine needs doesn't jive with the fact that the country keeps getting bombed with impunity, so why can't we just put out that fire? Now, Biden's recently pledged another $500 million in military aid for Ukraine, and we're already supplying a wide variety of high-tech munitions. So you have to wonder why a few airplanes that Ukrainians can fly themselves aren't in the offing. Now, shortly after noon on Tuesday, Biden seemed to address it in a brief statement after speaking with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He said that they had discussed weapons that the U.S. has already contributed and the critical effects that those weapons have had on the conflict and the continued efforts by the United States with allies and partners to identify additional capabilities to help the Ukrainian military defend its country. Now, meanwhile, the piece of shit Donald Trump has a thing or two to say, of course, and keeping it real. Trump issued a press statement at about the same time that we asked a question on the briefing, saying it was 100% true that he made a hole-in-one on the 7th hole of the Trump International Golf Club, which nobody gives a shit. And many people are asking, Trump said in the statement, anyway, there's a lot of chatter about it, I'm quite excited, I'm not really. A short time later, he asked Putin to release information about Hunter Biden's laptop. At least Trump knows that he's got his priorities wrong. And it turns out Trump is the guy who doesn't care about the fiery wagon or the burning village unless it benefits him. And in the meantime, he wants you to know how great he is at golf, which he really isn't. And Billy Joel was right. We didn't start the fire, but we sure as hell have added to the conflagration. And that's where Putin and his demonic endeavors strive. In the middle of a horror, strife, and war, as it turns out, he lit the wagon on fire and he pushed it into the village. Now he and others like him, including the traitor Trump and all his minions, have purposely misled the rest of us so they can loot the village as it burns. Of course, it's possible Trump is merely the village idiot fucking con man. Now, Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer and now one of his greatest critics, basically said something recently that puts all this into perspective. He said he had told an acquaintance who still sucks Trump's dick that he only feels that way because he's still making money off of Trump. And the man nodded in the affirmative, and Cohen said, "You're willing to sell democracy for $1. When democracy is gone, do you think you get to keep the top dollar?" Now, Trump doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about anyone. And Putin doesn't care either. Now, these are the people who want to watch it burn. They don't care about the village. They don't care about the villagers. They only give a shit about themselves. And the rest of us have to prioritize our response, put out the fucking fire, prosecute the arsonists, rebuild the village together. We can do with the village fucking idiot and the guy who set the wagon on fire. And if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of YouTube, to help further support the work. And you can donate as little as a few bucks for for the week or month, and it can go a long way. So thanks for listening.